This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good morning, Truth Seekers. We are back for another round of Hit the Road, Jack, Finding the Zodiac. Last week, we spoke with Harriet Suchet in regards to ciphers and codes and things that she thinks she has found inside of the messages. I did some research, so I backed this up a little bit. We're going to talk about a couple things from those solves that she found. One of them that I was interested in was the early onset of the message to Bauerdorf, or the one left in regards to her murder in September after Jack had returned from World War II. Harriet had mentioned that there was a connection to this particular message and an individual she believed named Thomas J. Devine. So in the communication itself at the end, it said this was divine retribution. We do know with the Zodiac case, most of his messages had 1 to 2 different meanings, and I have thoroughly searched for those meanings while I examined the handwriting and the communications in the Zodiac case. I just had not done that in many of the other cases, and I'm kind of playing catch up, especially as she delivers this new information. So I did a quick search on Thomas J. Devine to find out who this individual was. And it looks like, just a brief synopsis, is that after Second World War, he had joined the CIA. So in that particular time at the CIA, he, according to a declassified memo, let's say, Devine left the CIA in 1953 to help his associate, George H.W. Bush, to establish the oil company Zapata Oil, which we talked a little bit about that, and we get into that later on in the 1950s. I just thought it was interesting that this actually came back to an individual who was part of the CIA and somebody that was in the Bush camp. The Zapata Corporation split in 1959 into an independent company, Zapata Petroleum and Zapata Offshore, headed by George H.W. Bush, who moved his offices from Midland to Houston. Bush created a new company with Edwin Pauley of Pan American Petroleum, and Pauley is actually alleged to have close ties to Allen Dulles. So we're seeing a lot of the same names inside of the history on Thomas Devine. One of the things that I wasn't surprised to find is that you can see here at the bottom that this is actually coming out of the JFK encyclopedia, the information that I did find. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't fully read the article in regards as to why he is being included in the JFK stuff, but it's still wrapping itself up around everything that we have going on. And in my process of talking to some individuals who had actually done a couple tours over in Afghanistan or Iraq, that they had felt that there was a possibility Jack could have been part of the OSS, which is the Office of Strategic Services. So in the presentation here, I've thrown up a little bit of information in regards to the OSS. Of course, it was formed in June 13th of 1942. It was an intelligence agency in itself of the United States during World War II. The OSS was formed as an agency of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to coordinate espionage activities behind enemy lines for all branches of the United States Armed Forces. And we do see that Jack was initially in the United States Armed Forces, albeit he was on a ship in the Navy during World War II. Other OSS functions included the use of propaganda, subversion, and post-war planning. Basically, what I could tell is that they were involved in collecting information from across the enemy line and then delivering that information without being detected. The OSS was dissolved a month after the end of the World War II. The intelligence tasks were shortly later resumed and carried over by its successors, the Department of State's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, and the Independent Central Intelligence Agency, and the Strategic Services Unit. So I see that the OSS has actually been broken up into at least 3, maybe even 4. I did see the NSA in there as well. The OSS soldiers were primarily inducted from the United States Armed Forces. So that leads me back to my question to Harriet, whether or not Jack could have known code or cipher or any of these types of methods as early as 1945, 1946, as we see these messages coming out. She indicated she believed that he did. This here, as the OSS, supports that there's a great possibility for it. The reason why it was dissolved is because Roosevelt himself died. And once he died, everybody wanted in on what he had going on. The program was eventually picked up and continued after his death. However, again, it was named something different. So we see that it was dissolved in September 20th of 1945. I also found that extremely interesting because the letter from Jack in regards to the Bauerdorf murder was actually in September of 1945. So I don't know if that is what called him into action and was maybe trying to get information out there in regards to what was going on during this time in these programs. But it does suggest that Jack very well could have learned code at that point. So in 1939, commissioned by Franklin D. Roosevelt by appointing William J. Donovan as a coordinator of information, a civilian intelligence position that reported directly to the president. So sometimes when you think that the president doesn't know all because he's not supposed to, it appears as though there are people placed to directly report to the president in some of these instances with what's going on. They had 10 to 15 acre camps where they trained individuals who were recruited for their skills over their background. Trained to jump out of airplanes. We know that Jack was trained to do this. Communicate intelligence gathered and delivered without being detected. We are seeing that Jack was very capable of doing this through many, many years. Passing a series of tests for collective intelligence, imagination, creativity, and courage and ruthlessness for what the agency referred to as a PhD who could win a bar fight. And that pretty much sounds like Jack. In the beginning of this entire case, when I started it, I was told Jack didn't know enough as a security guard to be the individual they were looking for. However, after I was able to research Jack, we found that he was pretty much genius, and he absolutely could have been the perpetrator of this, and he could also win a bar fight. So he would have been perfect. Donovan actually himself preferred youth without direction or family, which makes Jack perfect for him as well. I asked, like I said, if the cipher and coding was something that Jack could have known as early as the lipstick killings, but it appears Jack was enlisted during a peak time for just this sort of thing. Maybe why the first message came after his deployment in the armed forces. The recruits were actually giving false identification documents, which we'll be talking about that when Jack is actually arrested, only under a different name. So each time I find his arrest warrant or court documents, it does not indicate Jack's true name. They were also expected to remain anonymous. Their mission, location, and true identity was secret. So they used methods as well, which really kind of perked up my ears, such as anthrax. I did not know anthrax was something that was around back in 1945, unless it was something we picked up from maybe the Japanese camp at 731, because I do know that they were using anthrax there. Alan Dulles, which is actually mentioned in the Devine paperwork, was part of the OSS. He was also a part of the MK Ultra programs ran by the government, and then the director of the CIA at one point. And we see him, I believe, in 1971 to 1974, attempting to cover up by destroying the majority of the MK Ultra program documentation that was available. That takes us back in. So The Devine retribution, we've already covered. Devine joined the CIA after World War II, left in 1953 to help his associate George Bush to establish his oil company. And Georgette Bauerdorf was an oil heiress. So there's another tie in there. I don't know if all of this is coincidental or there is a theme running around here. But to find out that Devine is being called out in the Georgette Bauerdorf communication based on the solve of Harriet, and that she was an oil heiress, and that he went on to help Bush to establish oil companies, is just another one in the mix there. Yet another Bush, CIA, and oil connection. We'll continue with Devine's contribution to Bush and his close ties with Alan Dulles of the CIA as we get through this. I believe, like I said, that's going to happen in the 50s. But for now, I just wanted to go back and talk about some of the communications and how those coincide. While we heard some of the solves, I didn't really get an opportunity to speak about these particular communications and how they play into the Zodiac case. So we're going to step back to the new haven't seen. And I say new haven't seen because at the time that I found this, it was listed in a newspaper, but I've not actually seen the communication. It's another call out to law enforcement at this point in time to make these files available. If this one has truly been solved and they believe that Hirons was the perpetrator, then all of these documents should be available for the public to see. So it says, Mayor Edward Kelly received a note that this is to tell you how sorry I am not to get old Degnan instead of his girl. Roosevelt and the OPA make their own laws. Why shouldn't I and more? So I and more is a phrase that we hear in the Zodiac letters. It's also used by Jack in his own report writing as a sergeant. And I might add that when I had the linguistics read on this by the PhD at UC Davis, he had indicated that the I and the police was a reference that was used less than 2% of the public on the actual study that he did. So it's a very unique way to place the word I and when we were taught growing up to put others first. So we would say the police and I, the Zodiac, Jack, and of course now we're seeing the lipstick killer also uses this I and more statement. So the more connecting to the writing on the wall, the 4x4 post writing that we saw that he was going to kill more, the DC Freeway Phantom predicts more, just like the Zodiac and the letter from Fairfield, California to the Atlanta, Georgia killer, and Tim Miller's letter on the I-45 murders. So he's upset basically that the OPA and Roosevelt are making laws that are not benefiting himself or who he works for, most probably. While I see that serial killers have taunted the police, they have written in letters, they have their complaints or whatever it is that's driving them to do what it is they're doing, we keep seeing that the likes of the Zodiac or these particular crime sprees are actually calling out political members and individuals that they're opposing. So I do use this lightly when I say that politics, the mob, and the CIA, all of these are completely wrapped up in whatever's going on. And at this point, I'm still trying to make that connection as to who is actually running Jack. While he calls out the police, the FBI, and then in 1990s, he calls out CIA, leads me to believe initially at first that he was CIA until I saw that he called the CIA out, which then put me into a kind of a short spin because I did not understand if he was now, because he was wanting out of what he had gotten himself into, or at least the information and the communications are suggesting that he wants out, that he's now saying he is even smarter than the CIA, which may have likely trained him in what it is that he does. If it isn't the fact that he's calling them out because he wants out and he's telling them he's too smart for them, then it means that he was somebody just a bit above them. And that could have led us back to the OSS or some of those other organizations that we talked about. So following the politics and the money, we also see that this is a confession letter. Again, just like Sherry Jo Bates and the Tim Miller letters, and the Ole Degnan is a Southern reference. So we're going to see a lot of Southern references that I will refer to as we go through this. And that just puts Jack back in Texas, where he grew up and where he learned most of these Southern references. So another communication I have not seen yet, which is from the lipstick killings, is if you don't catch me soon, and catch is spelled with a K rather than a C-A, I will commit suicide. You may find me at Club Tavern at, Please hurry now. Again, a communication I've not seen in full, but catch me soon is something that we are going to see in the Zodiac, Black Dahlia, Elizabeth Short, Riverside Phantom, and many more. Commit is a vulgar use of language, albeit misspelled, on purpose. Typically speaking, when I look at some of these communications and the handwriting, you can see large gaps around the misspellings, which indicates that the writer or the author had slowed down in order to internalize or idealize the use of letters that they're going to use. So when I found that there was a letter E error in an addition to a word, I found that there was large gaps around that E both before and after, which indicates that the individual is trying to dumb himself down and make it look like he cannot spell. So finding me at the Club Tavern, this one is huge. When I saw this particular message, because this is something that runs along the lines of the Bauerdorf letter that said that he would meet them at the Hollywood Canteen and turn himself in. In the Riverside letters, we saw that there is an attempt to also find me, catch me. Sacramento and Bay Area has several unsolved murders in which the girls went missing after going to a club or a convenience store. I've even found a relation to the VFW. There's been murders that have occurred from individuals who were visiting or around a VFW or some type of a veteran type establishment like the VA hospitals. Georgette Bauerdorf's killer said that he would be at the Hollywood Canteen, and the Oakland County child killer purported accomplice was to meet psychiatrist Dr. Danto at the Pony Express bar. So all of these themes are coming back into play. I'm not sure how many serial killers are out there saying, find me at a bar and you'll catch me. But the fact that we keep seeing this in a progressive message to law enforcement or to politicians or otherwise, tells me that we're along the lines of the same exact, or if not, we have other people who are perpetrating the same exact communications, which I highly disbelieve. Please hurry now is Georgette Bauerdorf and Elizabeth Short. We are going to see many references to slow down or hurry up. So I did some research on this as well, and I looked up the Tavern Club to see what was going on with this particular establishment. So it tells us that it's once a distinguished club that counted Frank Lloyd Wright, Mayor Richard J. Daley, Carl Sandburg, and William Wrigley as members. The original Tavern Club was a staple of Chicago social life. Starting in 1928, the Tavern Club was a vital part of Chicago social life. Artists, architects, mechanics, and media moguls would frequent the club, enjoying fine food and drink while taking in the exceptional views of Michigan Avenue, Chicago River, and Lake Michigan. So here we have, again, an upscale joint that the killer is saying he would turn himself in at, or that they could find him at. I find this isn't just your average rundown bar where your likely serial killer might be frequenting. This is a higher upscale containing politicians, media moguls, likely the mob, anybody who is well-to-do with lots of money that would be enjoying some type of an establishment like this. So I did a brief check to see where this particular location was, and I found that location is C here. So relation to the Yale Avenue address found in Jack's belongings. We have North Michigan right between it and Edgewater where the lipstick killings occurred. However, everything is still lying right here within the Naval Station, Great Lakes, and the address that Jack had and the vicinity or the proximity of the lipstick killings. Chicago, Illinois, and background of politics. I did a little bit of research on that just to see where we were at. At the time, State's Attorney William J. Toohey, enforcer of Chicago laws, was the right-hand man of the mayor, Edward Joseph Kelly. So he's calling out Kelly, or he sends the letter to Kelly, and he's calling out Roosevelt and the OPA. So at this particular time, Patrick Nash, chairman of the Cook County Democratic Party, good Lord, if the corrupt weren't corrupt, we find that the politicians are corrupt. And handpicked by Mayor Edward Joseph Kelly, his personal friend, after the assassination, go figure, of Mayor Anton Cermak. Nash and Kelly was said to have built one of the most powerful and most corrupt big city political organizations called the Kelly-Nash Machine. Mayor Anton Cermak was assassinated in Miami, Florida during 1933 with a bullet that was meant for Roosevelt. Again, a nice little tie-in there. Almost as if the killer may have been trying to put all of these things together to indicate what had occurred to Roosevelt. Because if Roosevelt truly died in September, circa September 1945, then why would he be calling Roosevelt out in 1946? Don't know. So Roosevelt sided with John F. Kennedy on deporting the likes of David Morales of the CIA, which that wraps back around because we hear a lot of David Morales in the murder of the JFK clan, who has been said to be involved with Robert F. Kennedy's assassination. William Toohey had his eye on the circuit court and was pressed to resolve the lipstick killings. So here's maybe why we see that they picked the next likely suspect for, or what they'd like to believe was the next likely suspect for these murders, in order to satiate the public, to help them to believe that they're safe, when really the lipstick killer was gone, I believe, the second that the Susan Degnan murder was completed, that Jack was gone, just like in any other case. So many times Toohey, he with a Chicago detective, would claim to have the killer this time, but then forced to release due to an alibi, passed a polygraph, or the police were forced to admit the fingerprints didn't match. Now, when I read that the fingerprints didn't match, I only have knowledge of a single bloody smudged fingerprint on a door jamb in one of the cases that was actually purportedly a match to William Hirons, and he was ultimately the suspect that was convicted of this crime. So to hear fingerprints, now I'm not sure whether or not to believe what I'm reading in the newspaper, because I absolutely don't. But if it was a single bloody fingerprint that was smudged, and we know that back in that day, fingerprint and ridgeology was not something that people were considering, and many mistakes were made, even in closer here to the present, in regards to individuals and fingerprints, because they were, the methodology for making identification through fingerprints was skewed. So some of the things that occurred in 1946, which is also interesting because I've heard some of these theories come up through the Zodiac stuff, is a B. Houts wins the Michigan Math Thesis Award. And we did have somebody who had stated that the last 18 symbols of the 408 cipher was not solved. Nobody could figure out what those 18 symbols worked into. Somebody had indicated that it had something to do with B. Houts winning the Michigan Math Thesis Award. And of course, this puts everything back onto the East Coast, where Jack was at the time. And he's recognized for sending a letter to Albert Einstein asking for his signature. So this would have been huge in Jack's life, because Jack was very enamored by Albert Einstein and the atomic bomb. Albert Einstein was actually in the Brains to War program. I never actually negated Jack from the possibility of being part of something like this. And this was actually in Great Lakes, Michigan, working on the atomic bomb for the US. At that time, Einstein lived in Princeton, New Jersey, and we do see some Princeton, New Jersey activity at some point in time. And we know that Jack, as the Zodiac, sent in a copy of post office box keys with a Christmas card for the area of New Jersey. And there is a consensus that the last, like I said, 18 symbols in the 408 cipher solved by the Hardens was random text / symbols that could be anagrammed out to Michigan Math Thesis. So I need to source that, kind of look back on it. I do know that there are a couple other people who feel that they have solved those last 18 symbols as well, and I'll take a look at their solves with everyone as well. So when I get into the handwriting, I'll start to look at some of the relations to letters, how they are set next to one letter versus the next, what type of form or style is used. And I noticed that in the format chosen by the lipstick killer when writing the word for, F-O-R, notice that it is written with a lowercase f and a lowercase o. However, the R is capitalized. Also note the relation of the F to the O and the sizes when compared to one another. We have these very tiny O's underneath the crossbar of the F. We have a very elongated, thin, shallow overhang of the F. We have the very small O, and then we have the capital letter R. Now, when I talk to people about disguise and somebody's attempting to disguise, we can look at the 4 different letter R's in the Susan Degnan ransom note. They are drastically different from one to the next with some similarity, but overall, if I had to look at these individual on a 1-to-1 ratio, I might determine that some of these R's were not from the same person due to a lack of the loop, whereas we see that 2 of them do not have a loop, 2 of them do. We see that there's a large overhang on some of them when there's not on at least one of them. These type of indicators might cause somebody to state that they are not from the same person, when in reality, when somebody is attempting to disguise their handwriting, they're using a form that they're not necessarily aware of they have in their arsenal, but they're also not aware that when they're making it, each one is almost drastically different from the next. And that's what we see happening in the ransom note. And that's why I believe that the author was attempting to disguise his handwriting. Back in those days, really all they had was fingerprints and handwriting. And this is something that the killer in this series was very well aware of. And he talks about making concessions for that and doing things that would disqualify him as an identification. So to make this point, we see the Los Angeles Police Department is called out, and Los Angeles Times gets a hit piece for a publication. Chicago Mayor Kelly is written to with complaints about Roosevelt and the Office of Price Administration, and the Chicago Tribune and Hearst's Herald is reaping the sales rewards from this. So following the money again, law enforcement was very hard pressed to arrest a killer. Jack would have been in Chicago, Illinois for several reasons. Again, we talked about number 1, his mother lived there from 1944 until an unknown time frame. Number 2, the military career for being very intelligent and for training in specialized areas, possibly at Great Lakes Naval Base. And number 3, he has pictures of himself in Chicago, Illinois, working on the public company of Northern Illinois owned by General Electric, association with power companies. General Electric, Jack was at in 1963. He also has a key in his possession for Rockford, Illinois Lock Company, and has a contact name, again, of Ruby Casacchio. So I have researched the person to be known that resided in Chicago, Illinois between 1930 and 1959. So she is there during the time frame in which Jack would have been there, either for training, for military, or his mother. So we'll start taking note of keys at this point, because this is the first key found in the little green box, as we call it, from Jack. And it becomes an important theme throughout the crimes, right on into the Zodiac cases, and finally to Tim Miller's anniversary letter, where the key is to figure out why he is still not known as the killer, or has not been arrested or identified, and that key thing just continues to run. I hypothesize that Jack was on his way back to Treasure Island in San Francisco after the Degnan murder, and that would put him completely out of the range. While everyone is looking for the suspect in this particular case, Jack is already gone. And that brings us to the handwriting examination that I completed on the lipstick killings comparison to Jack. We're going to find some extremely interesting things as we go through here. Some things are matches to Jack's handwriting, and some things are actually a match to the disguised handwriting in the Zodiac case. So it was probably good that I started with the Zodiac case and had a substantial amount of handwriting in order to be able to determine this suspect's not only range of variation in his natural writing, but also a range of variation in what he considered to be his disguised handwriting. So when I get up into the capital letter A's, and we'll talk about those as well, we did discuss some of the letters that Jack would want to conceal if he was not wanting to be identified as the author. That would have been the letter A's, the K's, the M's, the N's, the T's, the R's, the C's. I think we'll cover that list again, maybe as we go through this, but we can look up here and we can see the different A's in the lipstick killings. So Jack is on top, lipstick killings on the bottom. And as you go across these A's, you can see that they slant from left to right. The shape is almost very similar with a very high crossbar, and we can actually see in some of Jack's own writing, he has this very angular shape that leans primarily to the right. We don't really see any leftward movement in those, but I would actually allude that that's because these A's, he thought he was disguising. And the first attempt in disguise is generally to change the slant. People think if they change the slant, oh, they won't know it's me. That's not necessarily true. We can allow for that in disguised handwriting. That would be the first go-to. So the fact that we see different slants and we see almost different forms in these letter A's, they're not consistent. We would expect them to look more consistent like what we see on top with Jack's handwriting, where one is more similar to the next, especially when they're written during the same time frame. And we do have a couple of the red A's up there that were written during the same time frame, and you can see how those are consistent with each other. So jumping down into the letter B, no stranger here. Again, a letter that Jack would likely not form in the same way he does in his natural handwriting. We do see some block formation of the letter B, but what shocked me the most was to find that the letter B's that were written that were not in block form, actually compared to the Zodiac Bates letter, the Sherry Joe Bates letters, we can see that those B's are being disguised in exactly the same manner that we find in the Sherry Joe Bates. And that didn't, I guess, shock me to the point that I'm realizing that we're dealing with the same disguised handwriting. Just didn't think that I would find activity from 1966 to go back as far as 1945, 1946 as we're seeing. In the letter C, we see that the loop at the top of the C is something that is consistent in Jack's known writing. So to see in his earlier staged writing, this same type of curve or curl inside of the C, Harriet believed that this was actually executed in this manner to be able to use as either an E or a C, which we did see that occur in the Solve by Swearingham, where it completed the message, including Jack Terrence's name. And she may very well be right. Figuring out how to form these letters in a way that could conceal a message but also make a message would be absolutely genius. So I'm not going to put anything past that particular idea that he was using different forms so that they could mean different things, because as we discussed, the Zodiac typically used 2 to 3 different meanings in regards to his communications. In the letter D's, we did find that we had the same tall stems. The shape of the bowl of the D in the Lipstick Killer's writings, you can see, varies drastically from one D to the next, again, substantiating the attempt to disguise. In the letter E's, we actually found in the block letter E's from the signpost were very consistent with Jack's formation of the letter E, or the capital letter E, including the backwards, I call it the backwards 3E, the epsilon E, is actually something that Jack consistently used in his handwriting, and we see that they were also used in the lipstick wood signpost. Getting down into the F's, again, we do see some slight variation. However, they all seem to be a little bit more consistent with each other. And as you go through, you can see that there are different F's within Jack's range that are very consistent with the capital letter F. And that is exactly the same with the lowercase f. Once again, with that long, slim, shortened overhang with the tall crossbar on the F. And then the letter E's. I have variations here, including what we have going on behind me, which is one of the notes that was found within the vicinity of one of the murders, which says, "Please get me." Please get me, again, is right along the theme of catch me if you can, hurry up soon, before I kill more. In the letter G's, we didn't really have a lot going on there. We had the cursive letter G from the communication behind me, and then we had one letter G in the ransom note. The letter G in the ransom note is fairly consistent with the formation of Jack's handwriting. Some of these G's might be a little hard for you to see, but I may have to go back at some point in time, revise this so that it is more legible for everyone. I did pull out the letter H's from the Zodiac because we did not have, well, the H's in themselves, we can look at those again and see that they are disguised. One from the next looks different, looks like it's tipping over to the right-hand side in a couple of them. That was consistent with some of the H's from the Zodiac. And the letter I in the lipstick killings, the biggest one that was brought to mind was actually the circle I dot on top of the I, which is something that Jack definitely uses in his handwriting. No surprise here. If you go over to the far right on the bottom here, we see that the Zodiac also used circle eye dots. So the question then becomes, is the lipstick killing writing something that somebody idealized and attempted to copycat or imitate to throw people off? Or is this the particular disguise of an individual who continues to use that similar or same type of disguise in other communications? We will see when we get into a full-on handwriting presentation of all the serial killers together that it is actually disguise that is used almost on an anniversary state, even from one communication to the next during this killer's spree and lifetime. The letter K, I lined up all three of those. You can see inside this big red circle, and I put down slant bars just to measure off. I would typically do this in a case where I was going to court and I wanted to show that the slant of the movement was consistent between the authors. So I lined up these three Ks based on these slant lines, and then basically you can see that my slant lines themselves made a K, and in beautiful connection actually lines up along the same slants of these particular characteristics of the letter K. The letter L was also something, as I had indicated, something that Jack would want to disguise, and we can see that he had used a cursive version of the letter L in the middle of printed writing. He did that with the letter M and the letter N. I guess that he thought this was the best way to disguise these particular letters. And we look over to the ones from the wood sign, and we see that we have very, very tall stems and very, very short bottom crossbars on these L's. And that is very consistent with Jack's own personal writing as well. We can see right above in Jack's writing that these particular traits are also consistent. Getting into the letter M, again, we had the cursive letter M's. So doing a cross comparison to Jack's regular letter M's are kind of a hit and miss, though we did have at least one or two M's that were not in a cursive format. And we can see that the higher right-hand side of the M reaches up further than the left side, and that is consistent between both Jack and the lipstick killing. When we move over into the triple hump cursive M, we do see that Jack actually does make this particular M in that same manner, even with an entrance stroke that starts above the baseline. And that continues through to the lipstick killings letter M's. What was more interesting is that over to the right, if you can see this again, Zodiac Bates letter had also a cursive letter M. So once again, we are now in the Bates in 1966, which is a 20-year anniversary of the 1946 lipstick killings. And we see that this cursive 3-hump M is being used by the Zodiac. Not a coincidence, once again. So we're seeing that they are disguising their handwriting in the same way every time they write a communication in regards to the serial killings. The letter N's themselves within the ransom note are very, very consistent with Jack's letter N's, at least the capital N's in themselves. We can see the consistency there between Jack and Lipstick Killer. Moving over into the disguised version of the letter N, which is the lowercase n made in a cursive fashion with 2 humps, is also consistent with Jack's writing. And once again, we see this construction in what I call the Channel 9 newsletter of the Zodiac, which is to disguise those ends. His actual ends are very, very distinct, looking like almost a W, because he forms a capital letter at the lowercase size in the middle of lowercase printing. So that looks like more of a W when Jack writes it than anything else, and is very distinct. So to see that he is removing that from the arsenal in order to disguise as a double hump cursive N, and that the Zodiac is doing it in the Channel 9 newsletters, is just another consistency between the two. The letter O's, I didn't have anything really big to notate here on them. There are some similarities, especially with Jack's letter O's that were written back in the 1940s. But these ones do not contain some of the characteristics like the inner O loop that we saw in the Zodiac case. So this might not have been something Jack picked up or started doing until later in life. The letter P also has a consistency. So we see these, again, very long stems, and the actual slant of the P itself and the way the bowl reaches up into away from the baseline is consistent between the lipstick killing, even the form actually of the letter P with the two-stroke form and the crossing over or the surpassing of the stem itself, both at the top and the bottom, is very consistent with Jack's handwriting. The letter R's that we found that had the loop at the bottom in the lipstick killings are consistent with Jack's writing of the letter R's. He also uses a loop in these. Getting into the capital letter R's, again, I did feel that several of these R's were fairly disguised. He's using multiple strokes instead of 2. He's using 3 in some cases. However, we still find consistencies within these particular letters, and the overlapping of the actual bowl at the top of the R surpassing the stem, the buckle of the R and the leg of the R being consistent as well. The letter S, again, we have what appears to be some disguise. I don't think that I compared that to the Zodiac disguise, but we'll see that later. The letter T is having this particular construction, as Harriet had indicated, with this crossbar at the top, either being connected to the stem itself when it was written, or posed in that particular manner so that it could mean something else. I don't recall what she stated that meant, but she believed that meant something in the realm of symbols and the codes of Jack Terrence. To the right, the lowercase t, we see Jack uses the tau T, which has the small curvature at the bottom as it exits to the right. And we see that in the lipstick killings, albeit they are transposed, turned around backwards, almost as if to form a J. Those are consistent. The other letter T that we found was the one, as we see behind me, in the Please Get Me letter, and that we see at the bottom listed with LK on the right-hand side. And to me, that is what I refer to as a TPT. So it's formed kind of like a TP, opened at the bottom. The stem itself is not redrawn, and it has a little uptick or a kick up off the bottom right-hand side of the stem as it exits to the right. We can see that that's highly consistent with Jack's writing, whereby we see the TP effect that's occurring and the upkick that's happening at the bottom right-hand side. All of this very consistent between Jack and the Zodiac as we go back and forth with the lipstick killing writing. I did find a number 2, obviously, in the 20,000 of the lipstick killings, and that number 2 was consistent in the shape of the bottom. It looks like we're missing a little bit of the top, probably due to the process of copying. However, we can see that there are consistencies with the rounding out of the exit stroke on the bottom of the 2 and the size of the actual loop in the 2 before it exits to the right. Again, consistent with Jack. We took a look at the dollar sign as well. I made some brief notes there. Pulling out some of Jack's dollar signs, we find that he uses the double stem through the S insignia for the dollar sign, and that the last stem that runs through is basically at the edge of the dollar sign. So it starts right where the S begins and draws right through the very close to the edge of the bottom round of the S. And again, those were consistencies. We look at the letter Y's from the lipstick killings. Again, we have very, very different Y's, one from the next. However, none of those are out of the range of the consistency for Jack, with the exception of one where it looks like it was written with a single stroke versus the 2-stroke version that we see Jack using. I did pull out the words me, and what I noticed in that is that the E rides slightly above the letter M. In both of the cases, I could find it in Jack's handwriting, and that is consistent with the lipstick killers. We looked at the word get, and of course, in this particular case, I have a capital G versus a lowercase g, but we do see still that TP effect in the letter T at the end of the bottom one of Jack's. I also pulled up the word please and noticed that the consistencies here are, number 1, that the entrance stroke from the L begins far to the left underneath the actual P itself, as if the P is riding over the top of the L, moving on into the the connection of the A to the S. So if we look in Jack's writing, you almost cannot determine the difference between the A and the S unless that's pointed out to you. That's also probably because the A is not fully formed and closed at the top, but we can see that again in the Lipstick Killer notes, the A is actually kind of combined with the S, or at least they're not separated by a clean break or a connection stroke between the two that allows you to identify them differently. And then I also noticed that the S itself has this small loop at the bottom side that actually exits out of the S and into the E, and that is also consistent. So for me, these were some very good interpersonal characteristics in regards to the handwriting. And then we look over at the Lipstick Killer's words before and cannot, and we see that the word cannot and control are something, or the word cannot is something that we see in Jack's handwriting as well. So he does not abbreviate this word. He writes it out completely every time. And that is consistent in the Zodiac stuff as well. So this is some of Jack's movements. I kind of mapped it out based on Route 66. It does not necessarily mean it's the only route that Jack could have taken, but by taking Route 66, it allowed him to freely move back through Texas, visit mom on many occasions as he continued on to commit other crimes. It's my theory that Jack would scout out an area, as I said before, and when he would leave whatever state he was in to scout that area, we would see the first murder killed. Then he would go back home while everybody's searching for the suspect in regards to the killing. He is packing up the family and moving back into town and making it appear as though he's just now arriving. So he could not possibly be a suspect. Once he finds his new place and returns with his belongings and his family, we do see 2 to 3 more killings. And inside of 2 years, Jack is usually off to scout out a new place. So anywhere from 11 months to 2 years. He returns to where the family is. He commits his last murder before moving. Well, he returns to where the family is, moves them there, commits a couple more murders, then runs off, scouts out a new state where he is committing another murder, and then coming back to the family, leaving them empty-handed and unable to find a suspect because he's no longer in town, and then subsequently, once again, moving the family to that location. So it's kind of a cycle we'll talk about. So thus many of the phantom references that we've seen throughout. So my summary on this particular case are the crimes share a similar modus of operandi, the use of a bathtub to clean the victim, multiple stab wounds and bludgeonings, use of tape or bandages, not a robbery, even though the houses were turned upside down, not a kidnapping, even because the ransom note is found after the individual is actually killed, and the cases were not about sexual deviance or money. So if they're not there to rape, they're not there to steal, then that only leads us to believe that there is some type of other motive behind this. And it would not be a random serial killing. It would be more like a crisis instigation, targeted hits, or a political antagonist, all of which made large amounts of money for the media moguls. We see the involvement of mob, CIA, corrupt politicians, and so much more. Jack, to this point, uses trains to get around, travels extensively. He has intense experience in hunting and living off the land, even to the degree of being able to survive living in caves. He's been in 28 states by the time he is 17 years old. He enters the military for the first time, and I believe receiving extensive training in combat, and likely learned of his codes and ciphers as early as 1946. Jack leaves Chicago for California once again, and the Lipstick Killer is gone forever. Now, it'll be another 6 more months in this particular presentation before we get to the actual suspect they believe that committed the crime, arrested, and spent a good number of years in prison. In fact, died in prison over this particular crime. But we will get on to Bill Hirons and some of the fallacies behind him being the actual suspect and the attempt to actually free him based on belief he was innocent. and basically railroaded. With the corrupt way that police were operating back in those days, they actually did things like keeping a suspect awake for hours and hours and hours, repeating over and over again that they did the crime and that they would not be allowed to see their attorney or their parents or anything else unless they admitted to it. Or the fact that I heard many times in Hiron's case was that they would release him. He'd be able to go home and see his parents if he just told the truth, when they knew in reality, the second that he committed to it, it was all out war at solidifying that particular oh goodness, the fact that he admitted basically that he was the killer based on their demands. They could then run with that and use that to arrest, convict, and imprison Hirons for the rest of his life. So it looks like we are going to start next week back in California, which we're going to carry on with what I call the match, or the lipstick killer tie over into California. So for now, everybody have a great week. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions or concerns, you can reach me at findingthezodiac@gmail.com. Oh,